David, we're looking at the king who unified Israel. We're looking at some parallel passages. One is in 2 Samuel, and the other is in 1 Chronicles chapter 19. 2 Samuel is in chapter 10. The same account, or very similar wording of that account, is in 1 Chronicles chapter 19. So we're going to be looking at that passage now, and we'll go from verses 1 through 5.
Now after this, Nahash the king of the Ammonites died, and his son reigned in his place. And David said, I will deal kindly with Hanun, the son of Nahash, for his father dealt kindly with me. So David sent messengers to console him concerning his father. And David's servants came to the land of the Amorites to Hanun to console him. But the princes of the Ammonites said to Hanun, do you think because David has sent comforters to you that he is honoring your father? Have not his servants come to you to search and to overthrow and to spy out the land? So Hanun took David's servants and shaved them and cut off their garments in the middle, at their hips, and sent them away. And they departed. When David was told concerning the men, he sent messengers to meet them, for the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, remain at Jericho until your beards have grown, and then return.
So we have here a big disgrace that's happened now to these messengers of David that are sent to Hanun, the king of the Ammonites. Well, he ends up taking improper counsel that David's true intent is to come to spy out the land and discover their weaknesses so that he can come and invade them. But David had no intention of the kind. Nahash had formerly good relations with David. Now, David is going to subdue the Ammonites. He's not going to invade their territory to take possession of the land, but he's going to come against them to defeat them and to bring them into servitude to Israel. The Lord had spoken to the people of Israel through Moses back about 500 years earlier. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, he said to them that you're not to invade Moab and you're not to invade Ammon. And both of these nations were on the east side of the Jordan River. I think we have a map of this. Yeah, we'll have a look at it. We had seen it last week. We'll refresh our memories. The Ammonites and Moab are on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Moab to the eastern side of the Dead Sea. The Ammonites are a little further north of that. I think the next slide will give us a better picture of that. Here we are of Ammon is indicated right here, right in this region right here. So does that show it clear enough on that screen? Ammon. Moab is just below that, starting about where you have the pointer, and then down below that section. So on this map that we have before us, we're going to see that, well, we'll come back to it in just a second so that I don't have it up the entire time for our online viewers. David has instructed his men, because of the disgrace and the shame that they have been subjected to, because for them to have their beard shaved, it's not like today where, I'm going to grow a beard and tomorrow I'll shave it. It wasn't a matter of preference. The beard was a covering for them. And then also where they cut their clothes off at the tops of their legs, tops of their thighs. So now they're exposed and bringing great disgrace and shame upon them. So basically saying, all right, this is what we think of your idea to come and spy out our land. That's what he had in mind. David then determines that he's going to attack them. Well, as we continue reading, when the Ammonites had seen that they had become a stench in David's nostrils and in the nostrils of all Israel, that they sent money to hired charioteers from Mesopotamia, so that's further north, and from Zobah, that's back on our map here again. On this region up here, Zobah. See if I can, I'm too far away. Right at the top of this map. So they're looking to come down and to join the Ammonites in battle. We made reference to this last week that, still on, okay. So that here in Jerusalem, David, he prepares to cut them off. So Joab sets a battle against them. He comes to cut off the supply of these mercenaries, meaning fighters for hire, soldiers for hire, that they would come down, and Joab cuts them off so that they can't join their armies together. So keeps them separate, and is able, as a result of that, to bring defeat upon them. So let's come back to our passage here. Let's come down, verses 10 through 15 just basically speaks about some of the strategy that Joab decides that he's going to use. And then verse 16, when the Syrians saw that they had been defeated by Israel. So the Syrians were the ones from Zobah, so the northern part, the mercenaries that the king of Ammon had sent help for, they were cut off and unsuccessful. So let's pick it up in verse 17 and take it down to verse 19.
When David was told of this, he gathered all Israel and crossed the Jordan, and advanced against them and formed his battle lines opposite of them. David formed his lines to meet the Arameans in battle, and they fought against him. They fled before Israel, and David killed 7,000 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. He also killed Shophak, the commander of their army. When the vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they made peace with David and became subject to him. The Arameans were not willing to help the Ammonites anymore.
All right, so some of your translations are going to have the Syrians instead of Arameans. It's the same people group that are being spoken about here. So where Arameans in some translations are, Syrians in another, same people group, okay? So as a result of this, David ends up subduing this land, these people. So they become subjugated, they become vassal states, if you will. We saw last week that David had subdued the Philistines on the western coast. We can have a look at them back on this map. On the western coast, he had subdued the Philistines, the city of Gath. Remember, the city of Gath was the same place that who was from? Goliath, yeah. So Gath and surrounding villages, and now he has subdued Moab and Ammon and brought them to a place where they're not going to be causing a lot of more grief or issues for the people of Israel. Now remember, we had seen that David here is symbolizing Jesus. So that in the process of what's taking place with this subduing of the people, remember David, the account is about him bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem and setting it up for a place of worship. And we had seen in Acts chapter 15 and Amos chapter 9 that in the last days the Lord would restore David's what? Fallen tent. So the fallen tent was this, what had taken place under his reign, where there was a unifying of the people of Israel and the subduing of his enemies. And it wasn't just bringing in the unification of the people of Israel, but by subduing the nations around them. What's another word for nations when you're talking about it from a Jewish perspective? The Gentiles, yes. So the Gentiles is another way to speak of the nations around them, so that they were able to come to Jerusalem as well in order to do what? Worship the Lord of Israel. So, in the midst of what we had seen with the subduing of the Philistines right up after bringing in the Ark of the Covenant, then we had seen 1 Samuel chapter 9, we looked at last week regarding Mephibosheth. And it was a picture of what the Lord does as a result of his sacrifice. Remember the words that were the similarity of the words Pesach and Pesia, lame or limping, and Pesach, which is the word for Pesach so Pesach is the word for lame. Pesach is the word for Passover. Yeah. So it's hard when you got the Hebrew, but just to review a little bit of what we had seen last week. So that's sandwiched in the middle of what's going on with the subduing of the first group of nations, and now this second grouping of nations that the Lord is bringing under the rulership of David. In the midst of this, remember David, not only is he the shepherd, so he's the shepherd king now, right? So not only is he the shepherd, he's a king, he's a shepherd king, but he's also the great what of Israel? The psalmist of Israel, right? And when we consider the Psalms of David, one of the ones a couple of that I want us to look at, we find them in what is referred to as the
Song of Ascent.
The
No,
sheer.
Thank you. She's just getting
How
fancy
about-
over there.
which is the songs of Ascent. Yes. And they take in chapters, anybody know what chapters? Begin in chapter what? 120 to 134. So these are the songs of ascent. What does that mean, songs of ascent?
Saying as they're going up the temple, up the roadway up to the temple.
All right, so as they're making their pilgrimage to Jerusalem to worship, they would be reciting or singing this grouping of songs, among others, because they could sing or whatever they pleased, but it became their practice that as they made their journey to Jerusalem, they would recite and or sing these groupings of psalms. So, songs of ascent. I'd like for us to go here because this pictures for us what David was accomplishing in Israel. Now remember, it's in this idea of David made Jerusalem his capital. He took the Ark of the Covenant and placed it in a tent in this new capital. So it represents this new way to worship the Lord. It wasn't known up until this point. So up until this point, before David takes this action, how was worship carried out before the Lord? Where was it? What is it?
Sacrifices in Gibeon.
Sacrifices in Gibeon, which specifically is referring to the location where the tabernacle was. So the tabernacle was there, the tabernacle of Moses. All the animal sacrifices were still being carried out, but it was void or empty of the Ark of the Covenant. So that had been separated from the Ark of the Covenant since Samuel's earlier days, when we see in 1 Samuel 4 and 5 that Hophni and Phinehas went into battle against the Philistines. They were defeated. The Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant. 5 months later, they sent the Ark back to Israel. But it basically was just staying in a couple of different people's houses during that time period. So David brings the Ark now from the house of, anybody remember? Obed-Edom. And with this, sets it in Jerusalem in this tent. So let's have a look now in these songs of ascent. We're not looking at all of them. We want to be looking at just a couple of them bear the authorship of David himself. Not all of them were written by David. Only a couple of them were written by him. We have 121, 124, 131, and 133.
Aren't titled by.
So they aren't titled who they're by, so we don't know who wrote them. And with the others that have the title, a Song of Ascent of David, that it would seem to indicate that the other ones were written by other people. And this became a collection of these songs for these journeys to Jerusalem. Now, Psalm 120. We're just going to skim through a couple of these. David didn't write these first two of the songs, but I want us to get the idea of how this grouping is brought together, at least how it starts off, okay? So, just a few verses here, 7 verses. Let's read through it. Are we, Todd? Yeah. Yeah, we'll do 1 to 7.
In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. Deliver me, O Lord, from my lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. What shall be given to you, and what more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue? A warrior sharp arrows with glowing coals of the bough of broom tree. Woe to me that I sojourn in
Meshech.
that I dwell among the tents of
Kedar.
Too long have I had my dwelling among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war.
All right. This first psalm is a picturing of what it was like for Israel before there was a unification of the nation. When it says in verse 5, woe to me that I would sojourn. What does it mean to sojourn? Dwell, live, yeah, that kind of an idea. In Meshech. What is Meshech? What is Kedar? Yeah, both of these are places. What's significant of these places that he would say this? Well, let's have a look at our map so that we've got Meshech is mentioned first. Have a look at where it is in relation to Israel. Israel is in the red rectangle. Meshech is, you can go ahead and click it again and it'll circle it. There's Meshech, which is in Turkey. And then we've got Kedar, which is in, what is it?
In Shem.
Oh, in Shem. All right. It's in Arabia.
Oh,
So
okay.
the purpose of this map itself is a dividing of the nations from Genesis chapter 11, the table of nations, 10 and 11. Yeah, so the dividing of the nations before Abraham. So these are the sons of Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Yeah. So really what he's saying is it feels like we have been scattered to the nations. They haven't been, but they're saying like, I feel so far away from the place that is identified with the name of the Lord, his dwelling place, which is Jerusalem, the heartland of the nation of Israel. Okay, so Psalm 120 is speaking of these things that formerly I was in distress, and so I called to the Lord and he answered me. And I felt, woe to me, because it felt like I was so far scattered. Now, they didn't live in Meshach, and they didn't live in Kadesh, or excuse me, Kedar. But it's like these are some of the further reaches. It was symbolic of being far away from the presence of the Lord, feeling like there was this separation taking place. Well, let's go to Psalm 121 now. So we're just summarizing a couple of these so that we can understand the mindset and the frame and the context of what's going on. So Carolyn, would you do us 121? It's 8 verses.
I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore.
So this is a psalm of encouragement as these pilgrims are continuing to make their way to Jerusalem. They're en route. Now, it doesn't mean that the only times they looked at these psalms was when they were heading to Jerusalem. But they most certainly recited them when they were going to Jerusalem. What's the significance here? He says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From there, my help comes.
Hill.
Jerusalem was on a hill. Yeah. So I want us to have a look at the map once again, get a bit of an idea of the topography of the land. So here is some topography. Here's Jerusalem. So that just gives you an idea that no matter where you are in the land, you're coming to a place that is elevated. Now, even if you're coming from another place that is already elevated, like down here, which is Hebron, for instance, or further north, which is Samaria, you're still in the hill countries. But when you come to Jerusalem, you have to dip down first, no matter what your approach is, and then, because there's hills and valleys, so that when you come to Jerusalem, you go down into a valley, and then you ascend up, no matter what your approach is. Make sense? Let me give something for our in-house, just a little more of an idea topographically. So here's Jerusalem. No matter where you're coming from, you have to come up to Jerusalem. So even, Todd, would you mind just hand it over there once you've had a look, please? No matter where you're coming from, whether it's north, south, east, or west, you're always going up to Jerusalem. You're never going down to Jerusalem. Even if you're coming from the north, you're not coming down to Jerusalem. You're always going up to Jerusalem. So I lift up my eyes to the hills. So you have Jerusalem. You have Mount Zion. So do we have, you see where Jerusalem is here?
Yes.
Yeah, so Jerusalem. So no matter where you're coming, you've come from the Galilee, you're coming, and you would end up going up to Jerusalem. If you're coming to Samaria, you're going to be dipping down and then up to Jerusalem. If you're coming from Beersheba, Hebron, it doesn't make a difference where you're coming from. So I lift my eyes up to the hills. It's speaking of their anticipation of arriving in Jerusalem, the dwelling place of God. They are reminding themselves of the one who is their help for how long? From this time forth and forevermore. So it's a trusting the Lord for his provision. So they're moving along the hill country, making their way to Jerusalem. Then we come to this Psalm of Ascent, the Psalm of Ascent of David. So let's now take a look at Psalm 122.
I was glad when they said to me, let me go to the house of the Lord. Your feet were standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Your feet are standing within
Our
your
feet.
gates.
Our feet, right?
Why Our feet, okay, here we go. Our feet are standing within our gates, O Jerusalem.
Your gates.
Yeah.
There
Our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem.
there we go. All right.
There you go. Jerusalem, which is built as a city that is compacted together, to which the tribes go up, even the tribes of the Lord, as was
Decreed.
decreed and as a testimony for Israel to give thanks to the Lord, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. For there the thrones of judgment were set, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you, the holy city. May peace be within your walls and prosperity within your palaces. For your brethren and companions, for my brother and companion's sake, I will now say, peace be with you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will inquire your good.
So inquire for your good. All right. So this is a psalm of David. People are coming to Jerusalem, and now as they've recited Psalm 121, just finished with that, now they're saying, I was glad when they said to me. Now, notice the context here. It's I was glad when they said to me, let us, not let me go to the house of the Lord. We're going to look at that in just a moment, just a little bit more detail, why he says, let us go to the house of the Lord. Now, prior to the last couple of weeks' study, if you did come across Psalm 122 and read, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. What would you have taken that to refer to, let us go to the house of the Lord?
Israel.
So what would you have taken the house of the Lord to refer to?
Yeah.
The tabernacle or the temple, right?
Yeah.
But the temple didn't exist when David wrote this. Now, can it apply to the temple?
Yes.
Yes, because they would sing these songs of ascent after the temple was constructed. So, during David's day, it was the tabernacle that was the what's the word I'm looking for? You have a successor, what's a predecessor, right? It was the predecessor to the temple, the tabernacle. But he's not even referring to the tabernacle here. What is he referring to? It's referring to Jerusalem, because what is dwelling in Jerusalem now? The tent, the Ark of the Covenant. The tabernacle of David is there. The tent of David. So I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Let's go to Jerusalem. Let's go to the tent that covers or contains the Ark of the Covenant, which represents the presence of God. Now, up until this time, these Psalms of Ascent, the first couple, is their approach to Jerusalem. They're making their way along the hill country. And now, whether they are in Jerusalem yet or not, they are imagining themselves at the gates of the city. Our feet have been standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. And as they're reciting this, as they're speaking it, it's not just a recitation. This is a song of praise, of thanksgiving. Notice in verse 4, latter part, to give thanks to the name of the Lord. Or another way of saying it, to give praise to the name of the Lord. All that they are speaking here is now about joy. It's not about a begrudging duty of going to Jerusalem. So the question I want to ask you is, why are they going to Jerusalem? Why are people going to Jerusalem? Okay,
Worship around here.
all right. Potentially.
When David wrote this to me.
When David wrote this, yeah.
Doesn't the ark represent the presence of the Lord?
It does, yes.
So they would be gravitated towards that, would they not?
Okay, they'd be gravitated towards that. Let's consider something for a moment.
When they were going to the feast,
Okay, that's what we're going to look at. Yeah.
it's not that they had to go to Jerusalem,
They-
and the feast would have already been happening in David's time.
That's right. Yeah.
It didn't have really anything to do with the ark, so to speak, at that particularly, right?
Okay. So think about this for a moment. These songs of ascent are not just, oh, okay, I'm heading to Jerusalem, so I'll sing the songs. Now, they would have done that. I remember when we were in Israel, and the first time we were coming into the city of Jerusalem, we started to read some of the songs of ascent. Because we're cresting now, coming down from the valley and coming up, and all of a sudden you see the city of Jerusalem, you see the walls of the old city. And then they put on the bus, they were playing, but what's the name of the singer? John Starnes starts singing, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, lift up your voice and sing. And then we try to sing along with him, and of course all our voices are croaking and cracking because he's singing way up here.
And it was just a powerful moment.
It was a very
See the
powerful
city of
moment.
Jerusalem.
Yeah, for the very first time, laying your eyes on the city, the old city of Jerusalem. It was quite something.
Giving us goosebumps.
What, honey?
It's God's city. I mean, there's something special about Jerusalem. You
Yeah.
just can't put into words.
So I want you to be aware of this. Somebody living way up here in Dan, they're not likely just to take a few days or a week to head down to Jerusalem just to do some sightseeing. It wasn't a common thing because they were.
Have you ever ridden a camel?
Have you ever walked that distance? I mean, we're not talking about driving here. We're talking about at least a 3-day journey from the area of Dan or Nazareth. So we're talking about Naphtali and Issachar and Dan and so on. It's not just a matter of coming from Mount Carmel. And I think next week we'll go to Jerusalem.
Let's
But
go to Fredericton, right?
it wasn't just like going to Fredericton. It was a lot of consideration going into this. So it was already mentioned, the feasts. How often did they go to Jerusalem? What was the minimum amount of times that the inhabitants, the people of Israel, went to Jerusalem? The minimum amount of times. Okay, we've got 3 and we've got 6. So let's have a look at the scriptures. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 12 to begin. We are coming back to the Psalms. How many feasts are there in total? 7 feasts in total. And so we're coming now to Deuteronomy 12. We're looking at verses 4 to 7. And we're at Dale.
You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, but you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all the tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. There you shall go.
I'm going to just pause for a second when it says, shall not worship the Lord your God that way, meaning that you're not to worship the way that the nations worship when you come into the land that the Lord your God has promised to you. Yes, the Baals, the Asherah poles, and so on.
There you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the contribution that you present, your vow offerings and your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and of flock. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your households, in all that you undertake, which the Lord your God has blessed you.
Okay, so verse 5, you shall seek the place the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. And we looked several weeks ago at the scriptures that showed that the place that God had chosen was Jerusalem. Let's go ahead to chapter 16. 16 verses 16 and 17.
Three times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you.
So, when they were coming to Jerusalem, they're coming to celebrate three different feasts. First one is unleavened bread, which includes Passover. The second one they're to come for is so the festival or the Feast of Weeks, which is how long after Passover or unleavened bread? 50 days, 7 weeks. And then, we have lastly the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths, and that would be when? So we have Passover is in the spring, early spring. 7 weeks later is the Feast of Weeks. And then when is the Feast of Tabernacles? The fall, about September, according to our calendar, thereabouts, okay? When they're coming with gifts. And they're coming during the time of, some of the time of this is during the harvest. So they're coming with the produce of the land. You would think for some respects it would be, this is kind of inconvenient. What if I don't get all of my harvest in? They're not begrudging the interruption of the harvest or leaving whatever's left or working hard to make sure all of the harvest is brought in before they are to make their journey to Jerusalem. And it says, I was glad when they said unto me, because I'm an individual, so it's me that it impacts. I was glad when they said unto me, let us. Because it's not for me alone, it's for the entire nation, the entire community of people. Because under David, there was a unification of the nation. So for at least three times a year, at least three, the people of Israel, they were to come to Jerusalem. And when they came to Jerusalem, each of those three times, what did they recite? The Songs of Ascent. Let us go. So it was a communal idea. Jesus is a fulfillment of this. David was the great unifier of the nation. And Jesus was a great unifier of what would become known as the church. So that we would see in Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 4, pictures of this. So we're coming back to the Psalms, but we're going to pop over to Acts 2 for a moment. In Acts 4. When you get there, just go ahead and read it, all right? (44 to 47), I'm sorry.
were together and had all things in common, and they were selling their possessions and belongings, and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God, having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved.
Are they individuals or is it a community? So it's a community. Let's go to chapter 4. Looking at verses 32 to 35.
All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of his possessions was his own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and much grace was upon them all. They were not needy persons. There were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned lands or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone as he had need.
And one more. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews 10, we're looking at verses 24 and 25.
And let us consider and give attentive, continuous care to watching over one another, studying how we may stir up to love and helpful deeds and noble activities, not forsaking nor neglecting to assemble together, as is the habit of some people, but admonishing one another, and all the more faithfully as you see the day approaching.
So in these sampling of passages, we see how Jesus has unified the church to bring the church together, not just as individuals, not just as one person. You just do as you see fit, and you worship God on your timing. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't worship in our homes or wherever it is that we are, but He's called us to come collectively, come together regularly, and to encourage one another. And to do so, what? All the more as you see the day approaching. So here we have in Psalm 122, the one speaking this, like they're saying, I want to be with God's people. And I'm strengthened and I'm challenged by those who journey with me to Zion. Now, look at verse 4. Verse 3, I should say. Jerusalem now is the focal point. It's the destination. And where it says that built as a city that's bound firmly together, or it's compact together, what it means is that there's a lot fit into a small space, a small area. It's not urban sprawl. There's a lot that's being packed into a small piece of real estate.
I thought it referred to being a walled city.
It is a walled city,
Everything is
yes.
within its gates.
Pardon me?
Everything is within the gates. of
Yeah.
the walled city.
So it's not things that are outside of the walls, but inside the walls where it's compact together. It means that it's all there and it's all tight together. When you go through the streets of the old city of Jerusalem, it's not a wide area. Some places it's like corridors. Now, Jerusalem is the focal point, and then the purpose the focal point of the purpose is shown to us in verse 4. To do what? To give thanks to the name of the Lord. Now I want us to see something that's going on here. You don't see it in the English, but it's evident in the Hebrew. And it's based on this word right here. Now, do you see it in verses 4 and 5?
Oh, yeah.
Sure, why not? That's a mem, yeah.
Oh, he's right, that's 3 times.
Shem,
Shem, and
Shem, Shem. Now, where are they? Verse 4, you have it twice. And then we have verse 5 is the third one. Have a look here. It says, to which the tribes go up. The which or where they're going up to. The where is the Shem. It is,
Shem is where?
yes. So that is where the tribes are going up, all right? To which. So we call it there.
Oh, there.
There,
Not
all right?
where, but there.
Either. It could be either one. It speaks of the same direction, all right?
Oh.
Same place. So Jerusalem is the focal point of coming. The arrival to where what? To where the tribes go up. The tribes of the Lord, as was decreed for Israel. To give thanks to the name, Shem. Shem is name. And then number 5, verse 5, there, or that is where, so there, the thrones for judgment were set. So again, our second there. Let's connect some stuff here.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Their name there.
So very exciting. Here's their name there.
If we were writing this today, you would have this.
A little signature.
So what that does is it indicates vowels. So this would indicate an E, this would indicate, an A, this would indicate an E, and this would indicate the A, the Shem, the Shem, the Shem.
A?
That indicates an A,
Okay.
this indicates an E,
E.
and then this is just the same as the first one.
Okay.
So another A. It's making a connection between these three words that are being used. Jerusalem is the focal point, and it's there where? It's there in Jerusalem. It's there in Jerusalem that what? First of all, we're told that the tribes go up. The tribes of the Lord. What is this speaking of? This is speaking of the unification of the tribes. Before Jerusalem, before David was king in Hebron, leading up to him even being king in Hebron, what was this condition of the tribes of Israel? They weren't together. And there was a civil war that was going on, right? And prior to Saul's rule and reign, before Samuel, what was the condition of the tribes?
Benjamin almost got wiped out.
Benjamin nearly got wiped out. Yeah.
From Dan and the rest.
There was infighting going on between the tribes throughout much of Judges. So there was fighting. It was a fractured nation. They'd gone after the Baals and the Ashtaroths, the very thing that the Lord told them in Deuteronomy not to do, they're doing. They're full of wicked practices. Now, Jerusalem. David is the king. He's unified the nation. He has set up the place, brought the Ark of the Covenant to the place that the Lord had set apart. So it's there in Jerusalem that the nations find their identity, if you will, their unification, their purpose, their raison d'etre, the reason for existing in a sense, was because of the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of the Lord. So there, the tribes go up. And then we've got the anchor, if you will, because there they will do what? Praise the name of the Lord, or give thanks to the name of the Lord. L'chadot, l'shem Adonai, or Yahweh. To give thanks, l'hodot.
Yada,
Pardon me?
yada.
When you look at a Strong's Concordance in scriptures that have the words that are indicated there, that's the lexiconal use. In other words, the dictionary use of it. When you look at it in context, it would be how is that word conjugated, or in what tense is it being used so it appears differently than the dictionary or the lexiconal format. So, lehodot.
You mean like, everyday Jewish talk,
Yes. Yeah. So, if you have the word, if you have the word to run, all right, you look at the word to run, and in the dictionary it says to run. But you might say, well, they all ran. Well, you look at that, it says, if you're not an English speaker, you're like, well, the ran is not run, and it's not, that's fairly simple, only one vowel difference, but you get it, it's a very simple example, but a little more complex in this respect. So just to answer that question.
Like your two, and two.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, T-O, T-W-O, T-O-O. And then he says that as it was decreed for Israel to give thanks to the name of the Lord, or to praise the name of the Lord, or as a testimony to the Lord. What does it mean, as it was decreed? We read it. Oh, I took it off.
It was decreed.
Deuteronomy 16, that you are to go there for, at the very least, you're to go there for these 3 feasts, as it was decreed, that my name will be praised, or you're to give thanks to the name of the Lord at these specified times. You can do it as many times besides that as you want. If you live in Jerusalem, you're in Jerusalem. You don't have to worry about the travel and the journey. But you are prone to take it for granted if you're there in Jerusalem. So there's that potential as well. Nevertheless, that is the focal point. When it says, and then the third section, verse 5, the second there, it's in Jerusalem, but there what?
They're already there.
What does it say in verse 5?
There are the thrones for judgment stand.
So the thrones for judgment set, the thrones of the house of David. That David had one throne. What does this mean, the thrones of judgment, the thrones of David, or the thrones of the house of David?
Judgment is not like because I know they meet at the gate to do business, or even for the king to come and do business judgment.
Yes. So that's certainly an aspect of it. And his sons are specified as ruling alongside of him. Not just his descendants, like Solomon would be the next king. And then his grandson, Rehoboam, would be the next king. Let me take you for a moment to 2 Samuel chapter 8. Wow, we're not even going to get finished what I had hoped to be done tonight. Surprise! 2 Samuel
Not
chapter
really.
8. And we're going to look at verse, David reigns over all Israel. Okay, that's verse 15. He administers justice and equity to all his people. And then I want us to see down in verse 18 a distinction that is given to us. So somebody read that. Just somebody read that out, whoever has that.
David's sons were priests. You didn't want us to read all those names.
No, he didn't do that.
I think it would say.
And David's sons were priests.
Royal
Or they were
advisors.
chief officials.
Okay, so in the Hebrew, in 2 Samuel, literally it is priest, kohanim. Then when we see the similar aspect in 1 Chronicles chapter 18. Let's go there for a minute. So 1 Chronicles 18 and verse 17. Can somebody just go ahead and read that if you would?
David's sons were chief officials of the king's
Okay, so David's sons were chief officials. Now, in this passage, the word is not kohanim. Kohen is the word for priest. Kohanim is the plural for priests. That's the 2 Samuel chapter 8 word. In 1 Chronicles 18, it's the word Rishon. It's a different name, a different word, and it literally means one that is first in place or a ruler. Rishon, R-I-S-H-O-N-E, Rishon.
The other word, Conan.
All right, here's this one, Rishon, and then C-O-H-E-N is the Samuel. So I'm just going to put it Sam and Chronicles. Rishon, Cohen. Commentators that I've read, scholars that I've read, indicate that Cohen can sometimes be translated as ruler, but when you look at all the other times that Cohen is used in the scriptures, it says priests. And that translators tend to do Samuel, this word Cohen, as some of them will say as rulers, or like they have where they were chief officials, because Chronicles has chief officials. So they're David's sons, and in Chronicles it's chief officials. So, and because Cohen has as one of its definitions potential of a ruler, then they just automatically translate it as a chief official or a ruler. But
Actually,
they're both.
like David is supposed to be both.
Right. So you and I,
Points to Jesus.
under Christ, we are a nation of priests. We're a holy priesthood. David's sons served in whatever capacity, because what is in Jerusalem?
The name.
The name, the presence of God, the Ark of the Covenant, which is a new means of worship now. A further revelation of worship of God. And so to whatever capacity under this new way of worship, David's sons are ruling alongside of him as chief officials. So they are giving judgments, thrones, and judgments. And they are serving in some capacity as priests.
Isn't this what Jesus was telling his disciples? They will rule with him.
An aspect of that, but so for them, different than for you and me, because as apostles, you're going to sit on 12 thrones. But he doesn't say to all of his followers that we're all going to sit on 12 thrones. So that for the apostles, different than the rest of followers of Christ. But
That we will rule with him.
we will
An
rule.
aspect.
That's an aspect, yes. But sitting on 12 thrones as the apostles, there's a distinction between the two.
So they'll be kind of like sons in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So let's see if we can finish off. You know what? We don't have time to finish this off tonight. Because if we do, we're going to be cutting it short, and I think we're going to be served best by pressing the pause button there this halfway through Psalm 122. And then we're going to take that next week and finish it off with the last psalm, Song of Ascent of David, with Psalm 133. Okay? Because we'll deal with them together before we end up diving into the details regarding David and Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 11.
We're not
Alright.
finishing the song?
We're not finishing the psalm.
Seriously, there's
Yes.
like 4 verses.
I know.
Are we finishing it next week?
Yes, we are. Oh, yes,
Okay.
we're finishing it next week, and it's going to dovetail into Psalm 133.